All right. It looks like we're live. Great. So I have 3 people watching at the moment. And I will wait for a few more people to show up before we get started. Gone from 3 people to 1 person. Oh, now we're up to 2. 5. There we go. Now people are watching. Welcome, everybody. So this is the first time I think I've done a live video. Actually, I did one a few months ago, but I only had a couple of people show up. So we'll see how this goes. I've seen a few people sharing it, and I posted it on all my socials. So, but we'll just wait for a few minutes, see if the numbers change a little bit more, and then we'll just get into it and see what people have to say. So if you're joining me and you're planning on staying for a while, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, or you can even post any questions you might have in the chat right away. And then once I'm done introducing myself, I can go straight into the questions if I see any in the chat. But I appreciate everybody who's shown up so far. Seems to be hovering around the 5 people mark. So I'll just wait another minute or so. And if that doesn't change much, then I'll just go ahead and get started. But hopefully this ends up being something that people appreciate. And if I get good engagement, then I will go ahead and do another one maybe next week. I mean, we only have a little over 3 weeks until the election. So I can't do too many of them, but I could do 2 or 3 of them maybe. All right, so it's been about a minute or so, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. So I appreciate everybody who's come out to the stream so far, and hopefully we'll have a few more people come out as we're going along. So my name is Siever. I'm running as an independent candidate in the Canadian 2020 federal election in the Lethbridge riding. Lethbridge riding includes the city of Lethbridge as well as the county of Lethbridge. I actually originally tried to run as under the NDP banner, but through the vetting process, they felt that I was too prolific and too provocative in the things I say online. So what they mean by too prolific is that I just post too much. So I've been online since 1996, and I have been involved with all sorts of discussion mediums, social media, bulletin boards, chat rooms, mailing lists, blogs. My words are all over the internet. And as a result, they said that it would take them many months to be able to go through everything I've said anywhere on the internet. And as a result, I wasn't going to be able to, they wouldn't have been able to get to it in time for this election. And they did a preliminary analysis of some of the things I've posted, and they felt that I have too many provocative takes on issues. They wanted people who were going to take more moderated approaches to social issues. So they decided to go a different direction. But I still thought it was important that I run in this election. I felt that there are still going to be people, based on experiences I've had over the last year and a half, that would have similar approaches to political issues that I have. And so I thought it was important that I continue to run and see how things go. And so that's why I decided to go independent. I was going to announce earlier, but I wanted to give the NDP a chance and see what sort of a candidate was going to come forward. If it was going to be, a really well-known candidate who could really garner support around them, then I might not have announced. And so I gave them until last Friday. And if I hadn't heard anything, I was going to announce, which I did. I hadn't heard anything. Apparently, they announced among the membership, at least on Wednesday, I believe it was. But it doesn't seem like there's been much public publicity on it yet. And so, I just went ahead and decided to run as an independent instead. And I'm grateful that I did. I've had really positive responses so far. It seems like I have a lot of positive responses, but it's difficult to gauge how much local support, 'cause I have 10,000 followers on Twitter, and so I'm getting tons of comments, positive comments there, but a lot of my followers aren't in Lethbridge. And so I have to be really careful about trying to extrapolate those responses onto local support. And as well, even the same thing on Facebook, I don't have the same number of followers on Facebook, but it's the same thing. I have people from all over Alberta and even outside of Alberta who follow me. And so I just have to be careful about that. And so when I have heard locally, it hasn't been a lot of people. Like, it's been maybe 100 or more. I've had over 200 people sign nomination forms, but that's, again, no guarantee that they're actually going to vote for you. They just want to see your name on the ballot. But I'm going to need thousands of people to vote for me. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what the election day looks like. But I think it's going to be a really good experience. I'm going to learn a lot, and I think people are going to appreciate some of the things I have to say on various issues. So far, there are 3 candidate forums that have been planned, and I'm sure there will be more coming up. So that will be an opportunity for me to be able to express my positions on various topics and see how that responds. I'm sure that I'll get some questions. I've been pretty vocal about various issues, and I'm sure that I will have some questions directed at me in the question and answer portions of the forums, if there are any Q&A portions. I guess we'll see how things are organized given the pandemic. But yeah, it'll be an interesting experience. Again, if you are joining and you have a question that you'd like me to answer, feel free to use the chat. I'm just going through an intro at the moment, and I'll get to any questions that appear in the chat after I'm done an introduction. A little bit about me. My spouse and I moved to Lethbridge back in 1998, so we've been here for just a little over 23 years. We moved here so I could transfer to the U of L. I was going to college in Vancouver. That's where we moved from. I grew up in Saskatchewan, where I lived until I was 16, and my family moved to BC, and I lived there for 9 years until we moved here, till my spouse and I moved here. And then all of our children have been born here. We've raised our children here. Our oldest is now 22, and our youngest is 6. And our oldest is actually engaged to be married probably next year. So big range of children, 2 grown adults, and 1 in high school, 1 in middle school, and then 2 younger ones in elementary school. I graduated from the college in 2001, and I graduated with a multimedia production diploma, and I graduated from the U of L with a Bachelor's of Arts in 2013. I majored in theater, and I minored in French. My spouse is also a graduate of the U of L, graduating in 2019 with a bachelor's degree in English and Women and Gender Studies, and just finished defending her master's thesis last week, I believe it was. So she's starting to look for a job now. And then our oldest is enrolled at the college as well. So post-secondary education is important to us. I've been a community advocate for many years. This isn't my first time running for public office. I attempted to run I did run for city council in 2001. And but there were 35 other people running, and there were 5 people running for mayor. And so it was it was kind of chaotic. It was really a difficult thing to experience because when you have 35 candidates running and you give everybody a minute to give their introductions, for example, that gives us, you use up half an hour just like that. And then if you give everybody a minute to answer a question, well, then there's another half an hour, and now you're already past an hour. And the way they had it set up is often we would get a question and then we would respond, but nobody else would get the same question. No one else would have a chance to counter your responses. And so, it was just a really ineffective method of trying to reach people. And even so, we had lived here for only 3 years. And so I had not built up a network. I had never volunteered for anything. People just didn't know who I was. I still got just under 1,000 votes, but even so, it was nowhere near enough for me to get elected. And I decided, well, one thing I learned through that process is everybody who got elected was already well known in the community. And I realized that to get elected in Lethbridge, at least on the municipal level, you probably needed to be familiar to the electorate. They had to be familiar with your name. And so I started volunteering with various organizations in the city. And over the last 20 years, I've volunteered with over 24 boards and commissions and panels and committees. I've chaired a bunch of them. I've been on executive committees for several of them. And I've also volunteered my time in other initiatives, like several years in a row doing Target Hunger. I've volunteered multiple times at the soup kitchen. I volunteer most every week with Sage Clan. I've been doing that since last June, I believe. And, just various things like that. And so I'm committed to the neighborhood. And so I've seen some of the questions in the chat. I just want to remind everybody that I'm an independent candidate, so I don't represent any party. And so my positions are going to be primarily focused on how I can best represent Lethbridge as an elected representative. I will not be able to introduce policies that will benefit the country as a whole, especially if they require increasing taxation. That's something that the governing party has to do. So keep that in mind when you're asking your questions. And I want to try to limit the questions to people who are actually in my riding. And then see a little bit more about me. Oh, and because I'm not running under a party banner, like I said, I can't make promises, not big ticket item promises. Like I can't promise you tax breaks or tax hikes. I can't promise you childcare subsidies or farmer subsidies. Those are things that other parties can promise because they have that capacity and that infrastructure. But that's not to say that if issues such as those come up, that I wouldn't necessarily vote against it, right? If I felt that there's an issue coming up, an initiative or a program that comes up that could benefit the Lethbridge and the surrounding area, then I could vote in favor of it. And I wouldn't have to be committed to whatever a party wanted me to vote for. If there was an issue coming up that I didn't think would benefit Lethbridge and the community, I could vote against it, even if everybody else is voting for it, because I would have that flexibility as an independent candidate. I wouldn't have to worry about towing a party line. I wouldn't have to worry about being responsible to a party whip. And so I have that flexibility. And as well, it gives me the freedom to speak my mind and to be able to tell the truth, regardless of whether it's something that I think people want to hear or not. So yeah, and as a result, because I can promise so very little, then I'm also going to be, my campaign is pretty lean campaign. So it basically comes down to one word, and that's solidarity, and primarily solidarity with workers, solidarity with the marginalized, and solidarity with the environment. So I feel that workers are the backbone of our economy. They produce, their labor produces the revenue that businesses then use to, purchase other things in the economy or to be able to move things forward. And their labor also produces the products and services that other workers purchase as consumers through their own income. And so without worker labor and without workers as consumers purchasing things, then the economy would fall apart. I've seen statistics go as far as saying 80 to 90% of consumers in the economy are workers. So that's something to keep in mind. So workers are critical. So I stand in solidarity with workers. And it doesn't matter to me whether a worker is left or politically aligned with a right. I stand in solidarity with them and their constitutional right to be able to advocate for their workplace, to advocate for their ability to provide for themselves and their families, both now and into the future. And so I think that's something very important to me. Marginalized, as far as solidarity with the marginalized, I think it's important that everybody is treated equally, regardless of their gender, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, their religion, their ability, whatever happens to be. I think everybody should be treated equally. And that's in every capacity of life, and that's accessing government services or being able to just participate in the general society at large. And finally, the environment. I think the environment, especially in Lethbridge and area, is such a critical component of our life and our economy. The land gives us the food we eat, but it also provides food to the world. Like, we feed the world through the things that are raised in our community. So the land is very important to me. Water in the rivers and the creeks and the streams in the area fill our taps. They water our crops. They nourish the animals who roam the coulees and the river valleys. The air, having clean air is so important, as we've learned this past summer with all the smoky days that we've had. So it's important that we keep our air clean. And as well, just the general environment in the area. I think it's important that we respect it, and so that we can continue to have these spaces where we can go to clear our minds and to reconnect with the land, to remember that it sustains us in so many ways. And so those are the three most important principles to me. And I will use those principles as I represent Lethbridge as an elected representative. So whenever something comes up to the House of Commons, I will think if it will help workers, if it'll help the marginalized, if it'll help the environment in various capacities. And if so, then I will likely vote in favor of it. So that's pretty much about me in a nutshell. So we'll get to the chat now. What's your position on supply management? So I'm only tangentially familiar with supply management. I understand that there is supply management in Canada, particularly in the dairy industry, and that we use it as a way to discourage companies from coming into Canada from much larger markets, overwhelming the smaller players the smaller agriculture players in the country. So I think in principle, supply management seems like it's a good idea. I'm not morally opposed to it. So I think there's some benefit to it. On the consumer side, it makes things a little bit more expensive. But the price of things in the store is really only an issue if we can't afford it. And so it's not necessarily the price of the things that's the problem, but it's the price of things relative to how much we make. So as long as people have the level of income they need to be able to pay for their daily needs, then the price of cheese, for example, that's almost $10 a block, or milk that's almost $5 a gallon, then it's not really a big issue. The issue only comes when we can't afford it because we're not making enough money. So I think fundamentally I'm okay with the principle of supply management. I think it's important that we protect the producers in our country, and that they. Canada is interesting because we have such a large landmass and we have so few people that it affects the way that we can produce services. Whereas in the United States, for example, things can be, we have more people, a larger market, and so it's easier for you to be able to innovate on larger scale, whether it's in agriculture or in other sectors. And it's harder to do that in Canada. So it's important that we make things less harder on those in the agriculture industry. I hope that's answered your question. I'm not sure what your name is, so I'll just see what shows up there. So the next, if that doesn't answer your question, if there's something I left out, feel free to post and I will ask that, or I'll try to address that. I would like to know where you stand in regards to Assange's situation and what do you think should be Canada's position? Thank you. Again, I'm not sure what that has to do with Lethbridge. And I'm not sure that there's much of a connection to Canada either. So I think I'm just going to skip that question because there's nothing I can do as an independent candidate in that regard. So to follow up with your second comment, I am not interested in just city issues. I am interested in issues that affect the entire riding. So like I said, I grew up in Saskatchewan. My family comes from a farming background. I used to visit my grandpa every summer on the farm. He had a mixed farming operation. So he had dairy and pigs and various crops. He had a large garden, like a large vegetable garden. He had chickens, he had ducks. So he had all sorts of animals. It's not like that anymore. One of his sons runs it now. And he's sort of, he's less diversified than my grandpa was. But I'm sort of familiar with some of the issues that farmers have to deal with. Now, granted, I haven't been back to that farm in decades, and so I'm sure things have changed a lot since then. But I do think that there is, well, like the surrounding area is connected, intertwined with Lethbridge. Like a large portion of the Lethbridge economy is based on agriculture. Like we have food processing facilities here, and we have implement sales places here as well. We have transportation companies here in Lethbridge or the area. And so there's a lot of intertwining between the city and then the surrounding county. And so I think there's important, and as well, like as the city grows, right, then it creates these pressures onto the surrounding community. So as our city grows, as it spreads out with urban sprawl or whatever else, then it puts pressure onto farmland. And so we get less and less farmland, which then forces farmers to grow crops with more and more intense operations so that they can continue to create the same amount of output, because the markets continue to demand food products. And so the farmers have to keep producing those. And so, yeah, like I said, I think there's a lot of at play there. And not just that, but like transportation and commuting and everything else. Like, so not only do we put pressure onto farmland, but then other communities put pressure on Lethbridge as they come into the shop or use our libraries or, whatever it happens to be. So there's this intertwining between the two. So I think it is important that whoever's representing the riding has to represent not just Lethbridge, but the county as well, and be willing to interact with surrounding communities outside of the riding too. Ro Teddy, I'm in your writing, so wonder how you support women's rights matters to me. Well, I did sort of touch on that in my introduction. I'm not sure at what point you arrived, but I think it's important that everybody is treated equally, regardless of their gender or sexual orientation or ethnic background or their ability or their religious background or whatever happens to be. So yeah, I think that women's rights are important because I don't think that as a society we're at the point where women and men and people of other genders are equal. Right? We don't see the same representation in the population within various parts of society. For example, corporate boards. Even though we have roughly 50-50 men and women in our society, we don't have 50-50 representation on corporate boards. Even though we have 50-50 in the population, we don't have 50-50 on Lethbridge City Council or the county. And so more equitable distribution of or by gender, and very important that we respect women's rights. Happens to be. If there's specific issues you want to know about, Ro, feel free to ask again in the chat and I can respond to those specifically. Jeffrey Durlow asks, I know that it's mostly provincial jurisdiction, but what do you think of the government pandemic response, even just in general terms? Federally, I think that we did okay in the pandemic, particularly in the beginning. There are some things that were difficult. Like I think we could have responded more quickly regarding PPEs, and vaccine response and that sort of thing. But that was really an infrastructure issue, something that wasn't really the fault of the current federal government. That was something that was created by previous successive governments by underfunding and even selling off the infrastructure we already had in place. Like, for example, Connaught Labs, which used to research and produce vaccines. Had we had a public vaccine manufacturer, we might have been able to get vaccines out earlier, as well as governments successfully kept trying to look at balancing budgets without raising revenue. They looked for ways to cut, and cutting inventory was one way that they could do that. And so as a result, when a pandemic hit, we didn't have the surplus inventory that we needed in order to address those things. Same as capacity. If we don't build enough hospitals and we don't hire enough medical staff, then when it comes down to a pandemic happening, we don't have the staff in place to make sure that happens. Here in Lethbridge, we have Whip Up Drive, which is 3 lanes in each direction. But those 3 lanes in each direction are not filled up with cars all day long, right? It's only for brief periods, relatively brief periods throughout the day. But we build for that capacity. Even though we know it's not going to be like used all day long, we still build it for that capacity. So when we get to the point that we need it, it's there. And I think we should take a similar approach to our healthcare system. We should build to capacity and make sure that even though most of the time we might not need all those PPEs, we might not need all of those hospital beds all at once, we might not need all those doctors and nurses all at once, but they should be in place so that when we do need them, when there are large-scale emergencies, then we can respond to it without having to scramble by bringing in healthcare workers from other places. And so in that regards, I think we feel, but again, that's an issue that has happened over a long period, not just something that we can blame the Liberals for, or as, like you said, the provincial government, the UCP for. And then there was economic things like the CERB and the CRB and other worker benefits. I think those things were okay. I think they could have been better. Like, it would be great if we'd had a UBI instead. But it showed that that having monthly payments for workers could make a big difference. Like, people were able to still pay their bills, even though they lacked the money to do so, because they didn't have a job, but they still had this money coming in from these benefits, these temporary benefits. So I think that shows us that society could benefit from having something like a UBI or a guaranteed livable income. And then as far as the provincial government goes, I don't want to get too much into that because I'm not running as an MLA, and I'm trying to avoid getting into provincial politics during the campaign, even though I have been involved with provincial politics as an independent journalist, which I forgot to mention is my full-time job normally. And so I don't want to really get into that. I think all of the governments provincial governments could have done a better job responding to the pandemic. I mean, it's obvious. You just have to look at the number of cases, how it keeps going up and then down and up and down and down. So obviously there's something that our provincial governments, and not just in Alberta, but other provinces as well, that are not doing, because we keep having these spikes and then they come down, but then we keep having these spikes. And so there has to be a reason for that. And it's clear that governments could have been doing more. But again, I'm not running for the provincial government, so I'm not going to get into any details. Just to say, in general, I think it's clear that the governments could have been doing more, and not just Alberta. All right. Darren, thoughts on how to combat the drought issues with agriculture? 150 million given to ranchers doesn't seem sustainable. Thoughts on lab-grown meat transition? So I'm going to address the last part of your question, the last question in your comment first. So I'm what I call a functional vegetarian. I only eat meat if it's something that I catch or raise or kill myself, which, since I don't have a hunter's license or fishing license, I rarely eat meat. And so in that regard, I'm actually in favor of lab-grown meat. And I'm really looking forward to when it's commercially viable and something that is relatively affordable in the grocery store. I'm willing to give it a try. I have no problems with that. I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like. I'm actually pretty excited. I've known about lab-grown meat for a few years, like 3 or 4 years now, and I'm really excited to see how that takes off. 150 million given to ranchers doesn't seem sustainable. I don't know what that's referring to. I assume that's across Canada. If so, yeah, that does seem to be pretty small. And it seems to me that that's something that should be a little bit more than that. I don't know what that number would be, but it is important that we make sure that we take care of the agriculture sector. Because, like I said, they feed us and they feed the world as well. It's one thing to say, oh, we have irrigation and these various crops and stuff, but that's not something that is feasible on a large ranch, right? You just can't water your grass and expect your cattle to be able to eat the grass. You have to, if it's all dried up because of the heat and the dry weather, then it's all dried up and there's not much you can do about it. You have to bring in, you have to import feed, and that's, of course, costs money. And so, yeah, I think the long-term answer for addressing drought issues is trying to deal with climate change. But that is a complex issue. It's an issue that's going to take a few years to reverse, and it's going to take global participation. Like, no matter what Canada does, we're not going to be able to solve climate change on our own because it's a global phenomenon. So we'll have to make sure that Canada participates with countries around the world to try and get climate change under control. But of course, that doesn't really help ranchers right now. And so we need to be able to make sure that there are solutions in place to help with ranchers to make sure that they have all that they need. I'm not sure what that would look like specifically, but yeah, like I said, and like you said as well, Darren, I don't think 150 million seems like, not only that it doesn't seem like it's enough, but well, you said it doesn't seem sustainable. Yeah, no, it doesn't seem sustainable. Like, it doesn't, even if it was more money, giving ranchers $150 million every year in order to be able to feed their cattle doesn't seem sustainable either. But beyond, I'm not sure what else can be done to address large-scale drought I'm not sure what else the federal government can do to address large-scale drought. Because it's not a result of anything the government isn't doing. And so I think all that the government can do is provide the ability for farmers to be able to feed their stock. But if you have other questions regarding that, I'm happy to look at it. Let's see, ideas on installing solar panels on canals to prevent evaporation of water potentially. Yeah, actually, I think that's a really good idea. I saw something like that a few years ago. I don't remember where it was, but there was a country that was trying it. I want to say China or India, but don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I saw the video, but they were trying something similar to that. I think that's a really good idea. I mean, it allows us to produce electricity, and then of course it shades the canal to prevent evaporation. That's going to cost a lot of money because our canals are pretty long, and there are a lot of them in southern Alberta. But that's certainly something to consider. I would be more than open to seeing the government at the very least investigating it and seeing what that might look like. So I think it's a great idea, personally. Reese, along similar lines, how do you see funding for basic and applied research fitting into the future of the economy? I think research is important, broadly speaking, because I think we are living in a world that is ever changing, and we need to be able to respond to it. And I think research is at the center of that. Research allows us to better understand our society, and it allows us to better understand the issues that we're dealing with. And the better we understand these issues, the easier it is for us to be able to respond to them and to be able to adjust our society. And so I think it's important that we make sure that we fund research at our post-secondary institutions. I don't think that we should be selling off the research that is done by the various government institutions. I shouldn't say selling off because it's just transferred over to post-secondary institutions, but still, I don't think we should be trying to offload public research programs onto post-secondary, especially if we are reducing how much money post-secondary institutions get. So I think it's important that research is properly funded, whether that's through the government or whether it's through post-secondary institutions or whatever it happens to be. We need to make sure that research is properly funded. Darren, the UCP gave 150 million to ranchers in Alberta. I'm all for helping them, but we need to tackle the main problem. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like I said, 150 million is it's a stopgap. The real issue is trying to prevent drought in the first place. But that's a complex issue that's going to require a lot of cooperation from various entities, not just Alberta and not just Canada. And so if there's a drought, we have to find a way to be able to deal with it right now. But I'm not sure 150. So that sounds like it's a UCP thing. And so maybe 150 million for ranchers is enough. I don't know where that money came from. I don't know if that money is from the federal government or whatever it happens to be. But yeah, so we need to make sure that we can address the effects of a drought while also trying to find ways to prevent droughts from happening in the first place, or at least to mitigate how large it is. But again, that's a complex issue that can't be solved by one person. So I hope that it addresses that. Yeah, no problem, Reese. So at this moment, it looks like that's all the questions I have. But if other people have any other questions, I'm going to use this opportunity to have a drink, since it's been 40 minutes since I've had a drink. All right. Darren, what do you think about nationalizing the economy more and transitioning away from offshore production of most goods? I'm all for trading for goods that we can't produce, but most goods, something. I think there are areas of the economy we can nationalize. I'm not sure that we need to nationalize everything at this point. I mean, ultimately speaking, I think I'm all in favor of no longer having private ownership of the means of production. I think the means of production should be publicly owned, whether that's through the government, whether it's through workers, whether it's through the broader community, whatever it happens to be. I'm all for the public ownership of the means of production. So in that regard, I'm in favor of nationalizing the economy. But I'm not sure that we're going to see that in the near future. And so I would be fine with starting with various sectors of the economy, like public transportation, for example. Like when a private bus company comes in and says that they're going to shut down their bus service and basically orphaning all the small communities in Alberta, then the government can step in and nationalize that bus service. When we do have a national transportation service like Via Rail, for example, we need to make sure it's properly funded rather than like we did 30 years ago, cutting services. So now Calgary no longer has a Via Rail line like it used to. You used to be able to take the train from Winnipeg to Vancouver via Regina and Calgary, and now you can't. You have to travel all the way up to Edmonton if you want to go to Vancouver. But by the time you do that, you're always already halfway to Vancouver. So we sold off our airline and so on. So like there are areas there are sectors of the community of the economy where I think we can nationalize fairly easily. And ultimately, like I said, I would like to see the economy publicly owned, in whatever capacity that might be. But I think there are areas that we can nationalize in the meantime. And transitioning away from offshore production of most goods. Yeah, see, this is the thing that's I refer to Canada's economy as a rip it and ship it economy, and this has been the case for as long as Canada has existed as a European colonial experiment. In that that Europeans would come in, they would extract resources, whether it's beaver pelts or fish or lumber or whatever happens to be, and export it out of North America. And then we're still doing it. We're still exporting mined materials. We're still exporting oil. We're still exporting forest products. We're even exporting water. Like that's Canada's economy. We produce raw materials and then we ship it to other countries where it can be produced in raw materials, which then we can buy back. And I'm not necessarily opposed to being able to sell raw materials to other countries, but if that's the majority of our economy, then there's something wrong with that. We could be providing more jobs for people. Like, so we have this. Take the oil and gas sector in Alberta, for example, right? So it's supposedly one of the biggest sectors in the province, and we can get into that another time or whatever, how accurate that is. But the point is, we produce a lot of oil and gas. We produce the most oil and gas in Canada here within Alberta. But Canada produces 3 times as much oil as it consumes, and so the vast majority of the oil, it gets shipped outside of Canada, most of it to the United States, where then it refines it and sells it back to us or elsewhere. But in the process of doing this, and ever increasing production levels and ever increasing GDP in oil and gas, we've lost 41,000 full-time oil and gas jobs over the last 7 years. That's despite record production levels nearly every year during that period. Almost every year, production levels is higher than the year before. So we're producing more oil and gas, but we're losing more jobs. We're losing basically, on average, 7,000 oil and gas worker jobs every year, despite producing more oil, despite not only producing more oil, but producing more oil at a price that people are paying more for. So our GDP keeps going up. And so we're producing all this oil that ends up getting sold elsewhere. And so my point is that if we could produce more here within Canada, then we'd have more jobs, because we'd have to use oil and gas, for example, rather than shipping all that oil to be refined elsewhere. We could be refining it here, and that could create jobs within here. But it's not just oil and gas; it's everything. We wouldn't necessarily have to ship everything outside of the country. We could create more jobs by processing and refining whatever these raw materials are into final products, which then we could ship those elsewhere. So yeah, I think there's some some value in transitioning away from primarily offshore production of most goods. Thoughts on the RCMP versus provincial police? Is it more efficient to have a national RCMP force or a provincial police a better idea? Well, so I think this is the way I feel about policing. Generally speaking, here in Lethbridge, in Alberta, Canada, whatever it happens to be. Actually, I'll use Lethbridge as an example. I'm not sure what the numbers are for the county, but here in Lethbridge spends, for every $5 that Lethbridge spends in its municipal budget, they spend $1 of it on the municipal police force. And despite that, crime hasn't been going down, not at a significant rate. In fact, it's been increasing every year since 2014. And that the amount it's been increasing by has been going down, but it's still increasing every year. And that's despite the fact that we're spending 1/5, 20% of our municipal budget goes to policing. And I just don't think that that is a wise use of our resources. The problem with our current model of policing is that policing responds to crime. It doesn't prevent crime. And so I think we could be better served if we were able to refocus how we spend money on initiatives that could prevent crime. If we can start addressing the causes of crime. And as a result, if we have less crime, then we have less need for policing. So that's my general thoughts on policing. And so when you ask me RCMP versus provincial police, I think we have too much either way. Well, we don't have too much provincial police because we don't really have a provincial police force, unless you count the sheriffs, but it's not quite the same thing. So ultimately speaking, whether we have RCMP or whether we have the provincial police in Alberta, I still think we're going to have too much policing. I don't know that it's going to, for the end user, I'm not sure it's going to make much of a difference whether they're being policed by a federal police force or whether they're being policed by a provincial police force. I think for the end user, especially citizens who are marginalized, whether it's be queer citizens, whether it's be Indigenous, Black, or people of color, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference whether it's a federal policing force or a provincial police force or a municipal police force that is targeting them in that regard. So hopefully that's answered that question. Any other questions from anybody? As Darren says, I'm all for solving the core issues of crime and providing means for mental health help. Yeah, mental health is definitely one area that we can address. And by mental health, I don't just mean like making sure that people have their schizophrenia medication, right? Mental health is such a broad term. Like it's being able to make sure that people have the ability to deal with anger issues that they might have. Being able to help people to be able to deal with any feelings of revenge or resentment or jealousy or whatever it happens to be, right? So I'm looking at mental health on a very broad scale, not just like mood disorders or whatever it happens to be. And so I think, yeah, being able to address mental health is definitely an issue. I don't think that, generally speaking, not just in Alberta, I think this is an issue in all provinces. I don't think we do enough to make sure that we have universal mental health care. I've accessed mental health care before. And if you want to use the public option, there's often a waiting list and you often don't get to choose who the provider is. And if you want to get in to see someone faster and you want to have the choice, then you have to pay out of pocket or hope that you have a private health insurance coverage. And I don't think that's the way we should be doing it. I think that because we live in Canada where we're supposed to have universal accessible healthcare, that mental health should be included in that. In addition, like another big thing that we could do to help prevent crime is to address poverty. And so if we can address poverty and homelessness, then that could deal with some of that, as well. Addressing the drug crisis. I mean, you have to remember that a part of the crime, and as almost half of people who are in prison right now are in because of a drug-related crime. And so if we can address the illegality of drugs, then we might be able to address some of that crime too. And if we are able to reduce the number of people who are in prison, then we can reduce how much money we spend on the prison system. So yeah, I think there are a lot of things that can be done to be able to address the causes of crime, so that we can prevent crime rather than just responding to it. We spend a lot of money just to respond to crime that's already occurred. See, that's the thing with policing, is that by the time the police get to it, the crime has already occurred. So they don't prevent crime because they're responding to crime that's already happened, and it's happening despite the fact that the police exist. The police are in the community. So policing doesn't prevent crime, but it responds to crime. And so I'm not sure that we would do away with policing entirely. But I think that if we could build a society where we address the causes of crime, that we can drastically reduce what policing looks like, and maybe able to completely change what it looks like. And so it's completely different what we have now. So any other questions from people? These are being great questions. And so I really appreciate it. Some of these questions are things I haven't thought about before. And so I really appreciate some of these questions, make me think and consider my position on various topics. I'm grateful I'm getting a lot of questions from people on social media, specifically from Lethbridge. And so I appreciate some of those questions that are more agricultural focused. I'm really grateful for that. Any other questions from people? We're coming up on an hour. It's been 52 minutes that we've been streaming. But if there are questions that people have, I could take a couple more questions and see how those go. I believe that once I've finished this stream, that it will be up for viewing on my YouTube channel as an archive, so that anybody can look at it at any point. Yeah, I'm grateful for everybody who's participated. This has been great. This is the best live stream I've ever done. Like I said earlier, I've only done one other live stream, and I only had 2 people attend, and I got 1 question from each person, and that was it. So this has been amazing. I really appreciate this. And I think I'll try this again next Saturday. I believe it's next Saturday. I have something, I think, this Saturday after, but I think I'll try and do this next Saturday as well. So we have about 7 minutes left. I don't think we need to go past an hour. We can even finish early if nobody else has any questions. But if people have any questions, then feel free to enter in the chat. I'll just wait another minute or two to see if anybody has anything else to answer or ask. Oh, I think it's just me left. So I guess, someone just joined. Cool. Well, whoever you are who just joined, if you have a question that you want to ask, I'm here for just another few minutes. But everybody else has left. So if you have a question, feel free to enter the chat, and I'll do my best to answer it in the next few minutes. Thanks for joining. Okay, someone else. So just those of you who are just joining now, I just want to let you know that I'm probably going to be on for a few more minutes. But if you have a question, just post in the chat, and I'll try to address my thoughts on it. Yeah, so I'm really grateful for everybody who has participated so far and all the questions that have been asked. Have been great questions. And some of them have really made me think. Some of them are things I've already thought about, but there are other things that I hadn't thought about. So I'm really grateful for the questions, and um, it's really I'm appreciating the broad nature of the questions as well. All right. Well, then I think I will wrap this up. So I'm really grateful for this. I'm going to try and do this again next Saturday, same time, 7 o'clock. So Siever's Saturday stream at 7. There's something about that alliteration, I guess, that works. So I'm grateful for everybody who's participated today. Had all sorts of questions. I think I had questions from like half a dozen people. So that was awesome. Some really good questions. And I look forward to talking to everybody again next Saturday. And yeah, if you have other questions in the meantime, you can check out my website at kimsiever.ca/election. You can also find me on most social media platforms, and you can email me at kim.siever@gmail.com. And I'll be happy to engage with you with other questions you might have at another time. Thanks for participating, and solidarity. Hey, Papa.